Well, thank you very much for staying with us. This is the News Review, and we do it together with convener of Fix the Country movement, Oliver Barker-Vormawor. I see you already, Oliver. Good morning to you. I always say good morning using my time, but I guess you don't mind, do you? You'd have to unmute, Oliver. You're committing one of the cardinal sins of...
I am committing one of the cardinal sins. Good morning.
How you doing? I still can't hear you, Oliver.
You can't hear me.
Okay, it's better now.
Okay, you can hear me now.
I can hear you now. I can hear you
goodness.
now.
Okay. Well, let me still repeat what I've been trying to say for the past how many minutes. I'm saying no. I'm fine with it. Good morning. I hope you're well.
I am well. I hope you are too. You look a little. I don't know whether it's tired.
It's been a long day, so yes. It's been a long day, but I am fine.
Right. But good to have you. Good to have you on board. Let's dig right into it. And before we get into the papers, I'd like us to look at a few things that have been developing. So transport fares, some of those in the sector are seeking to review them upwards by 30%. Of course, that is on the back of price hikes when it comes to fuel. And we've also heard from Kweku Adjumandua, who is CEO of the oil marketing companies. And he is projecting that by March, we would hit 8 cedis and above per litre of, fuel products. This, I believe, or I mean, you can foresee, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this, or an economist, will make the economic straits of the ordinary Ghanaian even worse. Do you think it's high time government started doing something about our fuel price fluctuations?
It really does give meaning to breaking the 8, doesn't it? I think the question about trying to stabilize, fuel pricing is not something that we haven't tried to tackle before. There is the whole idea behind, the stabilization levy that was put on the pricing. The problem, however, is that when the idea was necessarily to put something in place so that when there were this movements in terms of, global pricing on fuel, government then will use the stabilization levy to subsidize it, meaning that we had already committed to raise some revenue on that. Unfortunately, in the past, it has been steeped in dishonesty, where the state puts in place the levy, and when prices started to rise, it wasn't kicking in to reduce and reduce the shock on consumers locally. And so it's unclear to me how much commitment there is in keeping that stabilization mechanism working in a way that is honest and true, and led by truth. When it has happened in the past, there's not been any remedy for citizens, for instance, to seek to force the government to respect, prior commitments that were made. In fact, there was no mechanism in place that required the government to do this and to, in fact, stabilize prices. It was political talk. And if you know anything about our republic, political talk, you put very little faith in it. Now, ours is an economy which is deeply tied into the the up and downs of the fuel pricing. This is particularly because we have very little diversified energy sources. And even in terms of electricity generation, unfortunately, with the car power ship and others, we are continuing to rely on those fuel to be able to power various sectors of our economy. So I'm afraid to say that we've gotten to a high degree of such reliance on petroleum products that I don't know how much stabilization we are going to be able to put in now for the immediate term to be able to shock absorb before we hit crazy by March and towards the middle of the month of the year.
Right.
But something has to be done immediately, and something needs to be done for the long term. And I think that the stabilization arrangement, which is really honest, that is put on a legislative framework that protects Ghanaians and stops them from the government, changing his mind mid-course might be helpful.
Well, only time will tell whether we're able to do that. But of course, We don't want the aid to be broken in that infamous way. Maybe in a different way, but not this way. But sticking to money matters and other matters of economic concern, I'm sure you followed the country representative for the World Bank in recent times, Pierre Laporte, who's been talking about the fact that we're giving too many tax exemptions and all of that. And we've heard our own president in one of his State of the Nation addresses talk about the fact that we could get to the point in about 16 years where about half of our GDP is going into these tax exemptions. But the World Bank has also been called upon to investigate how the money they've given us, we've executed or expended them in terms of dealing with COVID-19. We're talking about $430 million, some say up to $560 million. And the question is, if we used this on COVID-19, how are we repaying for water and electricity that we were supposed to have got gratis for free, for example, and all of that? The minority is also pushing for further information on this. From what you know about, the workings of the World Bank and COVID-19 and all of that, what would be your quick reaction to this? Especially, Oliver, let me add, as the World Bank has also said that they are going to investigate the use of the cash, and if it doesn't fall in line with what it was supposed to be used for, they will seek a refund.
I think that in itself will be a rare move by the World Bank in seeking for a member state to refund money back to the chest of the World Bank. I don't think it has happened to the best of my knowledge before. But generally, though, I think the global international institutions like the World Bank do thrive on some level of institutional accountability in terms of funding that is released generally. From the times past, they've stayed more on the higher level and rather than the granular level.
Right.
And even in terms of when they have asked for certain, funds to be committed to specific projects. Now, in this particular case, I don't know to what extent and what level of scrutiny they will be asking for. And even in fact, whether or not the kind of audit that will be done is a value for money audit. Not only a value for money audit, but also a project scope audit. So for instance, if COVID-19 funds were used to, say, support some football match in Chebi, let's say, for instance, are they going to say this falls out of scope, and so we're going to ask for a refund in that regard? Because there's very little practice and experience here, I'll be surprised to see what is done. But it speaks more generally to one of the problems we've had with government, and in particular, this government is blown it out of proportion, which is the level of profligacy, but also the absurd unaccountability that goes with it. But written in that is also some, I suppose, entitlement syndrome. There's a certain level of entitlement to our money, entitlement to other people's money, and spending it recklessly with very little apology. So these are questions that we're going to be monitoring, I suppose, all of us together in the coming months. Now, on the question of tax exemptions, it's one of the murky areas that you honestly do not understand under what framework we are seeking and obtaining tax exemptions for companies over and over again, such that the vast majority of taxes is borne by local industries and businesses created by Ghanaians, and they bear the brunt of it. And then we admit various companies or various, entrepreneurial interests from Western countries, and they come in to compete with our businessmen. And then we give them tax exemptions that in the long term end up hurting local competition, and then our businesses fold up. So this is something which I think the government is now saying that they're going to introduce some tax exemption, law to kind of sanitize the system. My preference is that for a government which is completely cash-strapped as to this, that we write off or we cancel tax exemptions for at least the next 10 years. That is not part of the Ghanaian vocabulary, and people cannot, give $1 million, pay $1 million to politicians, and in exchange get 550 million or 700 million in tax exemption. I think it's a funnel for corruption, and we need to deal with it.
Right. The Daily Graphic newspaper, 80 block schools upgraded benefit from additional infrastructure, and the government has decided to add some new infrastructural interventions at 8 of the existing community day senior high schools, popularly called E-blocks. The interventions are dormitory and administration blocks, bungalows for the headmasters and assistant headmasters, assembly halls, dining halls, and 2-bedroom, 6-unit staff flats. Then, early warning systems set up against security threats. Those stories on pages 16 and 17 of the paper. Upper East, West top FGM cases. That's according to the UNFPA. I'm talking about female genital mutilation. And SIGA to list 11 state entities on stock exchange. On the back page of the Daily Graphic, free surgery for hernia patients in the Western region. And we've seen how this has actually caused the loss of some lives in recent times, people who couldn't get operated on. And 500,000 Ghana cedi compensation for families of Ejura shooting victims. We know the Economic Fighters League has been talking about this in terms of justice for Kaka Macho. But let's get into the Ghanaian Times newspaper. Government will appeal Moody's credit rating. That's according to the Finance Ministry. Let's stay here for a while, Oliver, because I'm sure you followed how government, the push and shove, the ferocious manner in which they have contested Moody's rating. Only today, lest I forget, I spotted a sort of release that purportedly, we're still investigating, purportedly is from the Africa peer review mechanism that is also contesting this. But the fact remains that of the 3 major economic, or better still, credit worthiness rating agencies, I'm talking about Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody, Ghana hasn't fared too well. Yes, B negative with a stable outlook in some cases, B negative with a negative outlook. But with Moody's, it is a CAAA. Now, we're treading in very dangerous territory when it comes to this rating. Do you feel Moody's may have got it wrong? I mean, from where you sit and this antagonism towards it, what do you make of it?
You've jumped over nuggets of stories that, if you don't mind, we need to revisit. One was the SIGA purporting to enlist on the stock exchange.
Right, we can get into
SOEs. The other one is the Ejura incidents. I've continued to remain the legal advisor to the Kaka family and the victims of the Ejura incident.
Right.
And then this one as well. So I just give quick thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Just make them a little brief. The first two, the SIGA and the Ejura bits.
So SIGA, one. SIGA is overlooking companies that have enterprises that haven't turned a profit in a while.
Right.
In 2020, about 5 billion was the total accumulative losses that the state-owned enterprises incurred. The last time they turned a profit was way back, I think, in 2016, where they had a profit of roughly 460 million. But since then, it's been accumulating loss and loss and loss.
Right.
Nobody has lost their jobs. There's been no attempt to sanitize the system. No person on the board of directors has been sent to jail, has been prosecuted for monumental losses. It's actually how we want to ship off those losses onto the stock market and ask unsuspecting Ghanaians to give their money to companies which are terribly mismanaged. On Ejura, I think that, Ejura reflects to me, again, a moral failing of our republic. And even as I continue to provide legal advice to these families, I know that there's a long journey ahead. The quest to seek true justice, which entails some criminal responsibility on the part of the perpetrators, is something that the families are committed to and will continue to pursue. I've seen a statement by the Economic Fighters League, which I think it's completely without nuance and, misinformed or uninformed in this particular case. But that's a different altogether matter. But I think that we have a long way to go in seeking justice for the people, and I continue to work with the families towards that end. Now, the ratings, you had asked whether, Moody's got it wrong. It has come to my appreciation that the Finance Ministry will be seeking a review of some of these ratings. And that the President has gone on, I think before the AU, to attack the credibility of these ratings agencies.
Right.
And accuse them of some institutional bias against Africa. Now,
a number of African countries have actually suffered, some of them. I mean, to be fair, across the world, but quite a number of African countries, I think especially with the Fitch ratings, or is it S&P, have been on the wrong end of the ratings.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to be on the wrong end of a rating if you mismanage your economy.
Right.
Now, I have zero interest in defending these ratings agencies, having understood the nature, the institutionalized nature of international trade and global politics.
Right.
But in this particular case, I think that we have to be a bit more careful and scrutinize government's lack of consistency on this. We've seen them organize a Kenke party when they felt that ratings were good. We've seen them issue statements, and actually the Minister of Information has done a press conference to congratulate these rating agencies when it's given government what they consider to be favorable reviews in the past. By the same metrics, now they've reviewed the gravity of our economic situation, which is not unknown to all of us, which in fact is one of the biggest topics of conversations in this country, and determined that we are at a situation whereby, Bright Simon says to say that we are broke, it's not a policy term, and that we are completely broken in terms of how in which we are making financial decisions in this case.
Right.
So I think this is an attention-shifting device. It has been the way of dictators in the past with the domestic problems to create a foreign enemy and divert attention and say, look here instead of there. No, I still have my eyes on the e-levy and government's inability to be honest and accountable, rather than being distracted by some conversations around Moodys. Because the fact remains, we are in a terrible shape. Debt is spiraling way out of control. And in fact, my suspicion is that if we do fail to make payments in the coming, debts that we need to service, then it means that our situation is even going to be worse. I have advised Ghanaians that if they are smart, they will start taking money out of the banks and buying foreign currency to preserve their savings from a government that is mismanaging the economy. We've seen this happen before in countries like in Argentina, where because of spiraling debt and the government being unable to bring it under control, inflation rose incredibly, and persons lost their pensions and their savings. And I think that we are risking that if we don't take drastic measures.
I'll put these two stories together, though very different, from the Ghanaian Times newspaper and the Daily Guide. The first one has to do, in fact, let me do the Daily Guide newspaper first. 4 vendors crushed to death, and they lost their lives, and several others sustained varying degrees of injury when a truck lost its brakes, or had its brakes fail and rammed into vehicles in front of it at the Abri Junction in Nsawam yesterday. The truck, which was laden with cement, suffered a loss of its braking system, as a result of which the driver lost control, leading to the vehicle crashing into 3 taxi cabs. And gory does not suffice to talk about the carnage that this has resulted in. The other story I want you to look at quickly, putting them side by side, it's on page 16 of the Ghanaian Times newspaper. It says, $4 million SNIT-funded children's library left unused. Now, Oliver, you don't have the resources, and the ones you have to, you're not putting to the best of use. I singled out this bit because I have personally been to this place years back, and we spoke about this self-same matter, and here we are in 2022, and the status quo remains. An estimated $4 million pumped into this, and nothing to show for it. The project was built as part of SNIT's 50th anniversary celebration, and it's yet to be furnished. Those are some details for you. Oliver, over to you.
The accident one, gory doesn't even cut it, right? Like, it always reminds me of some movie I watched, which is about, I think, 1,000 Ways to Die in the Wild Wild West. Where it's like in Ghana, like the number of ways in which people lose their lives is amazing. Like, we're talking about, I remember when we're struggling with how to better pronounce whether it's a Apiate or a Apiate or all that. And to think that people died, were literally bombed out of a community in Ghana. In that same way, accidents that happen on our roads claimed comparable lives as well, and that's got very little media coverage.
Yeah.
The ways in which we find ingenuity in dying in this republic shows me the kind of value we place on lives in this country. Abandoned government projects. Listen, first, the country is actually in the middle of trying to mobilize homeless communities to occupy the Sagleme housing project. And this we consider to be our responsibility under Article 41 of the 1992 Constitution, right, to protect government properties and also prevent misuse and not and preserving the constitutional injunction that governments must continue past projects. This is the canker of our nation.
Right.
We are the only country in the world that has put in its own constitution a requirement that governments must continue past projects. Do you know how much it must take to put that in the national document? So I don't know what kind of sickness it is that spends over $200 million, loans it in fact, where we are continuing to accrue debt on because we haven't started even repaying it, and building homes at Sagleme and leaving them to the elements that now they are cracking and rotting. All the power plants there, or the copper wires have been stolen. There's a bus which has been abandoned on site. The polytanks have now been, because of the exposure to sun, now are in a very fragile state. All the finishing that were fittings that were done on the building are now completely in ruins. But $200 million. So I don't understand how we have a state that has very little incentive to protect public property, and we the people themselves sit down, go there, like look at them and say, oh boy, this is so bad, and then we walk on. 10 years down the line, we come back and it's the same thing.
Right.
It's happened under the Rawlings administration, the Kufuor administration, even built houses up north and left them to rot in the bushes. So I don't understand how our citizens can sanitize the system without taking, out of the box measures and thinking out of the box against a state that really doesn't care. It doesn't hit their pockets. They are not criminally or civilly liable for any of these things. So Nkosi Dabeng.
Interesting thoughts. We're wrapping the conversation, the review, I should say. On pages 10 and 11 of the Ghanaian Times newspaper, 11 million COVID-19 vaccine doses administered nationwide. COVID-19 cases shoot up by 165. And according to Amadako, Ellen Amadako of the NPP, a member of their communications team, politics is drowning the substance of the e-levy. My final thought to you, I'm hoping you can address in some 40 seconds. UTAG decided not to attend the convocation or confab with the NLC and the employer government. Your quick reaction to that?
The NLC has become an extension of the government, an extension that allows it to always toe the government line. I think that any institution that is in an industrial action that respects the NLC or even gives them any credence is not serious about what it wants to do. I think what UTAC has done is appropriate and recognizes their own power as an organized labor, and I dove my hats off to them.
Oliver, you're always a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, and I wish you the very best of today.
Thank you, and I appreciate it.
All right. And that is a wrap for the news review. Don't you forget, later on the show, we have the Vice Chancellor of the University for Health and Allied Sciences, Professor Japong, joining the conversation. It's going to be about, 10 years of UHAS and the impact they've made. We'll also be talking about the UTAG strike and what it means to him. Do stay, though, up next.